we talked to Steve Grove, the Commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development. Commissioner Grove will help us unpack the most recent employment data and talk about what he sees for the next Minnesota economy. And it's my pleasure to introduce you to Greater MSP's new Vice President of Marketing and Communications, Portia Robertson Migas. Portia is an accomplished national journalist and change leader. She has more than 20 years of experience as a journalist and producer at ABC News and National Public Radio. Most recently, she comes to us from a national nonprofit called Management Leadership for Tomorrow, based in Washington, D.C., that works to put professionals of color on the path to senior leadership in major companies and nonprofits. Portia will be interviewing the commissioner today, so over to you, Portia.
Peter, thanks for that warm welcome. And Commissioner Grove, we appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thanks, Portia. Good to be here.
Okay, let's jump right into a topic that's top of mind for so many of us, and that's jobs. Indeed recently released the latest data on jobs, the unemployment rate, and the labor force participation. At this stage in the pandemic, how would you characterize the region's economic recovery?
Well, of course, we lost a lot of jobs very early in the pandemic. Almost exactly a year ago in April, we lost about 416,000 jobs when this pandemic began. So that's a pretty big dip to take in an economy. It was extremely sudden, as we all know. Since that point, we've gained back about 220,000 jobs or so. So we're a little over halfway there, about 54%. So we're on the pathway to recovery. Every month we're seeing, 10 to 20,000 more jobs, which is good. It'll take, though, at that pace, still a year plus, I think, to recover to the level for which we lost those jobs. And of course, all the jobs coming back are not going to be the same as the ones that we lost. The economy has changed drastically in the last year, and many of the trends we were seeing in our economy before the pandemic hit only accelerated when COVID-19 came to visit us. So we are tracking very closely the kinds of jobs that we want to bring back. We want to make them longer term. We want to make them rooted in some of the highest growth industries that we think are going to propel this region to even greater success. And that's where the work of our agency is, to partner with the business community to do that, to incentivize companies to build and grow and start here, and make sure the jobs that we do get back in this recovery are great ones for Minnesota.
You mentioned that the pace of recovery, you talked about the pace of recovery a little bit, and we're seeing that the pace of recovery and reemployment is uneven in major metros across the country. Which sectors do you see having opportunity to accelerate the pace of job creation in the greater MSP region and in the state?
Well, you're going to see in these early days a lot of comeback in the hospitality industry in general, just because that's where the biggest delta is to make up. I mean, we lost over 100,000 jobs in hospitality when this all began. So you're going to see an initial surge there. But again, those jobs will come back in different ways, and not all of them will come back. It will take a couple of years for that sector to rebound fully, and it'll rebound in different ways. We're really bullish, obviously, on healthcare as a major sector of growth for our region. We know those jobs were in demand even before the pandemic hit, and they're even more so now. And then you got to mention technology jobs is a huge area of growth. I'm pretty worried that our pipeline for tech talent in the state is not strong enough. We've got some great institutions here that train folks in technology, but when you look at the demand in our market and the number of jobs available, we're concerned that the workforce is not going to be there. And so we've got to really invest in training workers in the technology sector, because that's where all the job growth is going, and not just in your typical tech startups or your tech companies, your software, enterprise institutions. It's really, so many jobs today are tech jobs. And so we think that is an area of focus that's critical. Those jobs pay far more than the average job in the state. They have far longer term trajectories, and it will be an area of growth for us, but we've got to invest in the kind of training that's needed to make sure that workforce is there.
And you mentioned that we need to invest in that training. How is the state doing it? What are you considering to accelerate that recovery in the tech industry and in other industries across the state?
We're starting from a perspective that we need systematic reform in our workforce development sector in this state. We have been blessed in Minnesota with something called the Workforce Development Fund, which is the only such fund in the country paid into by employers who pay a payroll tax that adds an additional $120 million or so every year that Deed manages to help grow a great workforce. But the format and the structure of that fund has not been modernized in over 30 years. So it really needs a fresh look to meet the needs of today's marketplace. And really the first area of focus there is equity. We need to make sure those dollars go to communities of color first, that we make sure the grants that are needed to help great organizations do the kind of training we need, go to organizations with experience in BIPOC communities. This is not only a moral imperative, which we all truly realize now in this last year we've had in our state, but it's also an economic imperative. 70% of our population growth in the next 10 years is coming from people of color. So we are pushing right now the legislature some major reforms on that front to make sure we redesign that fund to focus on equity and on the modern jobs that we're going to need and the kind of innovative workforce development programs we want to be able to fund. Now, specifically to technology, one of the things I was surprised to see when I came to Deed is we don't have a standalone technology, workforce program, which we really need to have. And so we are incentivizing a lot of organizations who do tech training to apply for our existing grant programs, and we're running some pilots. We are in the process right now of running a pilot focused on tech jobs for people of color between the ages of 18 and 30. That's a gap that we see is really clear in our market. It's not being served. It's a pilot program. We're running just $1 million pilot, but if it's successful, we'd love to graduate it and make it bigger so that pipeline really grows and we can accomplish really two goals at once. Empower our tech workforce pipeline to get stronger and help people of color get higher wages as they enter the market, and tackle some of these disparities that are so evident across our economy.
You're empowering the workers, you're upskilling workers. What requests or suggestions would you have to private sector employers who are looking for these workers?
Well, I think this has been a moment of awakening, a year of awakening for our region. There's no question. And the business leaders I talk to all get that. They recognize things have to change and they have to change now. And that we can actually make a difference. The verdict in the Chauvin trial, I think, shows that change can happen. And now it's up to us to really take that baton and move forward and really tackle some of these systemic issues that we face. There are a lot of best practices out there for companies to hire people of color more effectively, to try to eliminate unconscious bias in hiring processes. We have spun up an office of New Americans at Deed that focuses on helping businesses hire refugees and immigrants, because a lot of times a business, may want to hire people of color or people who are new to our state from even other countries, but they don't quite know how. They don't have the inroads to those communities. They can't speak the language literally and figuratively. So we, as a state agency, want to try to provide some of that connective, opportunity to help businesses tap into some of those pools of labor, which are so important, not only from an equity standpoint, but we are right back to these same workforce shortage conversations we were having before the pandemic hit. I talk to business leaders every day who are struggling to hire. And so we've got to help every business in our state, land some of those folks. And I would just encourage business leaders to take advantage of Deed, come to us, reach out. There are resources to help you find workers and to tackle issues of disparities in our economy. And we would love to help.
Mm-hmm. I want to circle back to something that you touched upon earlier. We know that the people who've been most impacted by the pandemic are people from the BIPOC community. They're women, they're low-income folks, and they're folks with lower educational attainment. What do we need to do differently in order to get different results? What questions should we be asking? What issues do we need to be addressing to ensure our economic recovery is inclusive?
This is the $1 million question, and it's such an important one. I think we need to take a look at a lot of different facets of this issue. One is hiring and where we focus on in our hiring processes, but another is new business starts. And one of the trends you see in a recession is that more people start companies. And we see in this state already about a 30 to 40% increase in the number of new business starts since COVID hit. Part of that is people seeing a disruption in the market. Part of it is just desperation because they lost their other job and they're starting a new one. But for people of color, getting capital to start those businesses can be really hard. Going to a traditional bank doesn't always yield the same results that people that have more traditional backgrounds or credit scores or credit histories might have. So one of our big areas of focus is providing technical assistance and frankly dollars to community development of financial institutions and others who can give unique loans and grants that are a little bit different from what a bank might give, and take a little bit of a risk on a newer entrepreneur. Sometimes that's someone who's never started a business before, with specific focus on communities of color and culturally focused efforts of outreach. So I think that's a big part of it. I don't pretend to think that DEED has all the answers on what we're going to do to systemically reform our economy, but we want to create the right grant programs, the right source of funding to make innovation possible in our market today. And I think for a long time, our workforce system has been kind of steady at the wheel and not trying enough new ideas. One of the things we're creating in DEED right now is an innovation grant program that just says, hey, we're looking for new approaches to get at equity in our workforce development system. Pitch us what you've got, and you bring us your ideas, and we'll fund them. That's, I think, a key thesis that we have. And I think to get that right, you got to have business and workforce organizations working together, because that's where the magic can really happen.
You just touched upon how important having the proper funding and grants are for there to be able to be progress. And we know that significant federal funding is coming into cities and to counties in the state through the American Rescue Plan. How is the state of Minnesota and how is DEED assessing how we can leverage those funds to accelerate recovery and transformation in our region?
Well, it is hard to overstate how exciting it is and what an amazing opportunity is for Minnesota to get north of $7 billion from the federal government to help recover from COVID and bring back jobs and opportunity for people across our state. It's a tremendous opportunity. Now, a lot of that money will go to counties directly, which is great. Local solutions for local problems is fantastic. And then about $2.6 billion of that will go to the state. Of course, we'll talk with the legislature on what the possibilities are there. But I would say our core thesis is you've got to focus on the people that have been hardest hit by this pandemic. And you got to focus on using those dollars in ways that spur long-term investment. Yes, we are still in a recovery, and yes, we still need to put some rescue dollars into the hands of businesses who've been affected by COVID-19. But this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to invest a lot of money into markets to help provide the kind of capital that people of color starting businesses might need, to provide the kind of reskilling training that might be needed for people to think about shifting jobs, because of course, that's a major trend we see right now with the people who, been in hospitality, but those jobs aren't coming back at the same pace. They might need to consider healthcare or other industries. So I'd say, focusing on small businesses, focusing on reskilling, and then focusing on promoting Minnesota to the world. And this is something that I think, Greater MSP does so well, which is to say, look, this is a phenomenal place to build a company. It's a phenomenal place to work. It's a phenomenal place to raise your kids. And it's also a place that is reckoning with some of the deepest issues that our society faces today. And we're rising to that challenge. And we're going to make this a priority of Minnesota. We need to tell the rest of the world our story, a story of renewal, a story of growth, a story of opportunity. And I think some of this funding and some of these efforts could help, tell that story in the coming months and years ahead. There's going to be a lot of competition in the wake of this pandemic for where new business growth happens. Some of the things that happened in COVID-19 completely changed the perspective that employers have on where their employees need to be, remote work, where the opportunity lies. You see a huge exodus from the coasts to other states. We want to make Minnesota the kind of place that people want to come to, that they want to come to work, they want to come to start a company. And that takes real investment. That doesn't just sort of happen magically. It takes real dollars, a real focus. Is something Greater MSP is very good at. And we think the state government should play a key partnership role in as well.
Mm-hmm. You talked a little bit, Commissioner, about turning the page, turning the corner and looking towards the future. And earlier at the beginning of this program, Peter talked about the focus on the future. That's what you've also been talking about in a series of events you've led called the Next Minnesota Economy. Could you tell us about this series and what could or should be different in the next Minnesota economy?
Yeah, but we've really learned a lot from this series of roundtables we've been holding with business and labor and community leaders across the state on a whole host of issues, trying to learn more about what this next chapter of our economy can look like. And we are doing this because we know it's going to be a very different chapter from the ones we've had before us. Not only has the pandemic drastically changed our economic outlook, but of course, the killing of George Floyd and the civil unrest that followed really awoke our state to some fundamental issues that we need to tackle with a lot more vigor than we have in the past, until we can truly be a state that we can pride ourselves in our equity outcomes. So we think the next chapter of the Minnesota economy has to start with equity first and foremost. That has to be the main focus. We want to be having a conversation 10 years from now where we say, look, back in 2020, we had this inflection point. The whole state rallied, the community gathered, and we changed things. And 10 years later, we have made substantive progress in our economy for people of color. So I think the next chapter has to start with equity. I think the next chapter of our economy really has to focus on startups and new business growth. We are a state where we have the highest business survivability of any state in the country for small businesses, which is great, but we're near the end of the line when it comes to new business starts. We're 47th in the country when it comes to new entrepreneurs. That's not the kind of formula for success if you want to be the fertile ground for which the next Fortune 500s grow. So we have really got to focus on our startup community. Programs like Launch Minnesota do that. Forge North, which Greater MSP runs, is a phenomenal partner in that endeavor. We have to shine a light on this as an innovation ecosystem, one where both new companies can grow and established companies can professionalize. And then I'd say, reskilling our workforce for the future is a major component of that next chapter. Already, jobs were shifting rapidly beneath our feet, and the pandemic just sped that up. So we've got to provide the kind of training and transition opportunities for folks to consider new industries, for that not to be as scary, but actually feel like an opportunity, and for that journey of a career path to be one in which you feel like you're not alone. And the kind of reskilling efforts that we need, whether that's in our Min-State system or here at DEED, provide a whole host of opportunities to really invigorate people with a sense of possibility versus a feeling that the robots are coming to take our jobs, because that's never fully been the case. But I think that fear is out there, and we think we can combat it with the right kind of programming and the right kind of opportunity for Minnesotans. So there's a whole host of things that will animate the next chapter of our economy, but those are some of the things that we spend most of our days thinking about.
Commissioner Grove, you've provided some thoughtful and important insights for us today. Thank you for taking the time to be with us.
Thanks, Portia.
Peter, back to you.
Thank you, Portia, and thank you, Commissioner Grove.